Okay, so last week we were looking at how Conduit ditches grades altogether.
Right.
This week we're going even deeper into their approach, and we're taking a look at how Conduit is actually like kind of throwing out the whole traditional way we think about like learning and remembering stuff.
Yeah.
And they're using something called spaced learning.
Uh-huh.
And I think it's super fascinating, especially for neurodiverse students.
So you know how like after you cram for a test, right?
Oh,
And then like a week later,
yeah,
it's all gone.
Yeah.
Like you remember nothing.
totally.
That's what's called the forgetting curve.
Okay.
And Conduit realizes this is a thing, and they're actually actively combating it in their approach.
So how are they actually like fighting this forgetting curve thing?
They're using spaced learning,
Okay.
which is basically like going back and revisiting information
Right.
at certain intervals
Yeah.
to help it stick.
Okay, so it's not just like one and done.
Right.
You kind of like come back to it
Yeah.
and then you come back to it again.
Exactly. Like, think about when you learn to ride a bike.
Okay. Yeah.
You didn't just like get on and like, bam, you're a pro.
Right.
It took like practice and falling and like getting back on
Yeah.
and doing that over and over and over again.
Right.
It's that repetition that makes you learn it.
Totally.
That's basically what Conduit is doing with learning.
Okay, so instead of like cramming all about fractions in one day,
Right.
they would kind of like sprinkle it
Yeah.
throughout the whole curriculum.
Exactly. Like a student might learn about fractions on Monday.
Okay.
And then maybe Wednesday they do a quick quiz.
Uh-huh.
Then the next week they might be working on a project that uses fractions.
Right.
And then maybe like a month later they're revisiting fractions again.
Yeah.
And that could even be in a different subject,
Oh,
like music or art.
that's really cool.
Just constantly like revisiting and revisiting and revisiting it.
Yeah.
So it really sticks in there.
I get it.
Yeah.
So how does this tie into neurodiversity though?
Like a lot of research actually shows that a lot of neurodiverse students do really well when information is given to them in smaller chunks.
Oh,
And then they get to revisit it over time.
yeah.
Whereas like traditional teaching kind of throws everything at you all at once,
Right.
which can be a little overwhelming
Yeah.
and make it harder to remember stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
But space learning kind of like,
Yeah.
it breaks down for you. It
Oh.
makes it a little easier to digest.
So it's almost like Conduit is setting like a custom learning pace for each student then.
Yeah, kind of, but it's not just like the pace.
Right.
It's also about meeting them where they're at.
Yeah.
So like some students might learn better visually.
Uh-huh.
So Conduit might use like interactive games or visual aids.
Oh, cool.
Other students might be more hands-on learners.
Yeah.
And they thrive with activities like Conduit's design project.
So they just kind of like weave all of this together.
Yeah.
And it makes it so much more like
Yeah.
interesting for everybody.
Yeah. Especially for neurodiverse students.
And that actually reminds me of last week when we were talking about competencies and that gardening analogy
Okay.
that pops up again in this text about spaced learning.
Exactly.
You know,
They're connecting the ideas.
Yes.
So you're not just remembering the facts. You're understanding like why and how it connects to everything else.
Yeah.
It's like the bigger picture.
So even though it might seem like this way of learning takes longer,
Right.
Conduit is actually like playing the long game here.
Exactly.
They're not just trying to get you to check boxes. They want
No.
you to actually learn this.
Yeah. Conduit realizes that like real learning is a marathon,
Hmm.
not a sprint.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
By using space learning, they're setting up all their students for success.
Right.
But especially the ones who need a more like personalized and flexible way of learning.
This is seriously making me rethink like how we all learn.
Yeah, it's cool stuff. So like the main thing to remember here is that space learning,
Uh-huh.
it helps fight that forgetting curve.
Yeah.
And it helps all students learn,
Yeah.
but it's especially good for neurodiverse learners.
Right.
It helps them build knowledge that lasts.
I like that.
Yeah, it's all about realizing that like real learning takes time
Right.
and effort.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Makes you think, like, how could you use spaced learning outside of school?
Right.
Like, if you're learning a new language
Yeah.
or like picking up a new skill,
Totally.
something to think about.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us for another deep dive.
Yeah. See you next time.